All right, so remember a few minutes ago I said we have PARs and then we have RFAs. Now we're into the RFA section. There's got 3 parts. We're going to be talking about nucleic acid sequencing, synthetic nucleic acids, and then a coordinating center. I'll just take those one at a time. So the novel nucleic acid RFA sequencing RFA set. Right now we're at about $6 million of grants funded in FY19. We have $2 million competing yearly. We've made 30 awards in 4 years. About a dozen of those are small business grants. They're in my notes, which I can't quite see here, but I'm pretty sure it's right at a dozen. And so we've actually been way more successful pulling in small business grants here. That's in part, I think, because of the history of this community and the grantee meeting. Enhancements that we expect to make here. So this was also successfully launched in FY15, sort of phased down the $1,000 genome RFA set, and then we brought in this novel nucleic acid sequencing technology development set of RFAs. And we are going to reissue those. And these are the enhancements we expect to have. Alternative, we want to really stress alternative sequencing approaches. I think almost anyone in this room has used more than one way to sequence nucleic acids, and we'd like to see another new way that's funded under this program, and there are some good candidates out there right now. Phasing is still an important problem in the field. It's a solvable problem. It's getting more solved, but we certainly will continue to ask for really good phasing off of sequencing. You can infer from that that long reads are likely to be very important. Telomere to telomere sequencing. This is something we added that language to the current RFA about a year ago, a little less than a year ago. But we want to make sure we stress the need for telomere to telomere sequencing. Native nucleic acids. Many of the methods used amplified DNA, and we certainly recognize the importance of amplifying DNA. Carrie Mullis did us a big favor, and yet what we really probably want to do is get to a point where we don't amplify DNA. We look at the native nucleic acids. And that is, of course, possible on some platforms and not others. Then multiple base modifications. We really would like to see a sequencer that can read not the 4 canonical bases, but read many of the common base modifications in addition. So maybe you have a sequencer, ultimately that can do 6 or 8 bases. Wouldn't that be fantastic on native material? And then, of course, clinical applications here are important. We realize that the needs in the research laboratory are not the same as in a clinical lab. And we want to try to make sure that we push it that direction and give opportunities for those who want to come in with new technologies to bring it into the clinic to have a funding source. We're going to be increasing the amount of funding from not $2 million, where we're currently at, to $4 million competing annually. And that'll be from FY22 to 24. So the second component is synthetic nucleic acids. And if there was a theme that I heard over and over again in some of the strategic planning sessions, it was, we need cheaper, more accurate, longer oligonucleotides and nucleic acid constructs. And what we heard was, at least in one occasion, I heard it put really well, can't we have a $1,000 genome project for this? Right? This is so impactful, we just need to put the money in and make it happen. And so that's a pretty big ask. You consider that that $1,000 genome cost $100 million if you'd sequenced a second one after the first human genome was done. But we certainly ought to get started on this problem. And that's what this RFA, this set of RFAs is intended to do. So the new efforts are going to include oligonucleotide and synthetic constructs, increasing accuracy, lengths, and throughput, reducing costs, including base modifications. It turns out oligos with base modifications are very, very expensive these days. And in principle, they could certainly be much less expensive, and that would be very helpful. And then methods for delivering those synthetic nucleic acids into cells. $3 million competing yearly, FY21 to FY23. So those are sort of the easy ones to talk about because they're a lot like what we've been doing with sequencing technology and now with synthetic technology. The one that's a little harder to talk about is our coordinating center. It's not hard. It's mainly harder because it's new. Right? This will be a new effort. We're going to make it work. Okay? And what we see when we have our grantee meetings and we pay attention to how this community is working together is we are helping the community work together well. And some of the evidence for that I see, it's a little hard to talk about, is in applications that come in where I was in the room when two people met each other 6 or 8 weeks ago. Right? And you go, wow, you were at the meeting, you talked to each other, you made things happen. Right? And that's a great beginning to what we can do to leverage this community. But with a coordinating center that can help these disparate efforts, so we heard a question earlier, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't refer to earlier. We have a variety of grants here. We have R01s, we have R21s, and we have small business people that are trying to figure out how to commercialize technologies, all under the same program umbrella. And we'd like to have the coordinating center help us move that all forward faster. So we want to launch this in FY20, which is soon in our time frame. It's going to be it's a new effort that's going to facilitate collaborations among investigators. It's going to help synthesize and disseminate advances that are taking place in the technology development field. We need a place with some additional help for technology transfer and as a knowledge resource, especially to help investigators from a variety of institutions. And then an important piece that talks to a place I've heard about before, we heard about a few minutes ago from Steve, is how can we get small amounts of money to investigators sooner so they can just do things, right? And prove something's going to work. And that's the opportunity funds. And then the other thing we heard at our grant, especially at our strategic planning feedback just after our grantee meeting, was a number of the grantees say, I need some help even figuring out how to get my technology to the clinic. So we're hoping that Coordinating Center can help provide some of that kind of information for investigators who may be at more of a university setting that doesn't really have sort of the medical school right next to it environment. And we certainly have some of those grantees. So the cost of this is going to be $1.5 million in competing dollars. It's $1.5 million, and that's for FY21 to FY24. I'm not quite sure if I need the word competing in there. So I look at the slide set yet one more time. So where are we today? All right. Where are we? Where are we going? Okay. So this is our current effort. We're sitting here at about $28 million. We've got sequencing technology, RFAs at $6 million. We've got genome technology development, $11 million. And then there's a base of about $12 million of R01s and R21s that came into the parent announcements, along with a few R03s. So I'm not talking about any small business grants here. I'm just talking about the non-small business, or the majority of our portfolio. So this is where we're going. So what we want to do is approximately double sequencing technology from $6 million up to $13 million. And I told you about that a few minutes ago. We're proposing to accept $4 million of competing funds in sequencing technology development for 3 years. That's what the concept, that's part of what this concept clearance is about. And then next, we're going to add the synthetic technology RFAs. Now notice, and that's for $8 million over 3 years. So I've sort of cheated here a little bit. It's FY19 and then magically it's FY23. But we'll be gradually stepping it up about 15% a year to get from 19 to 23. And the last piece of this is the coordinating center. At $1.5 million, it's going to help us run grantee meetings. It's going to do the other pieces that I talked about, enabling the community. Right? and it's going to have the opportunity funds there to help move things forward faster. Now, I've forgotten to say one other thing I meant to say earlier in this application, and so this presentation, so I'm sorry I forgot about it till now, which is for the genome tech, which we already talked about, then for sequencing technology, and then for the synthetic technology, we're going to accept applications essentially every other council. So they come in, they get reviewed, they go to the council that's 2 away, and then we take them 3 or 4 weeks after that council meets, so that instead of once a year, we take them essentially once every 8 months. And that's just a few more receipt dates. I did say this a different way earlier. This is a way to try to accelerate. So steady growth, that's where we're going. And it's time for questions and discussion. Yes, Trey.
Yeah, so in the synthetic genome part, you mentioned this fascinating concept that sort of called up the $1,000 genome. And I wanted to maybe ask you to press you on that a little bit and ask you more questions about it, because you didn't say this explicitly, but if I explicitly interpret that, what you're saying, I think, is the goal would be to synthesize a human genome for $1,000. Is that what you actually meant?
I did not mean. I wish we had a better.
So what is like?
I wish we had a better name
on
for it.
What $1,000 genome like means?
Well,
I mean that would be a great goal. I'm not sure how practical it is.
I think I had next to that the word impact. Right. So we're looking for the impact of being able to sequence a genome for $1,000 has been tremendous for the field. And so the impact of being able to synthesize nucleic acids for very low costs, for much longer lengths on both an oligo scale and then on a construct scale, ultimately, I don't think we can do this tomorrow, but we've got a SEGS grant to Jeff Buka that's it's trying to do hundreds of KB, and he's done whole yeast chromosomes. So, we want to facilitate really being able to build. The way I've heard this, and I totally agree with it, is if you understand it well, you can build it, right?
No, fully understood. And I'm very supportive, actually, and I think it would be good to have some concrete, far-reaching goal. And the question is, what exactly is that? Now, certainly you mentioned synthesis of yeast. So in yeast now, arguably, we've either synthesized a yeast genome or we're close to having synthesized a yeast genome. It was nowhere near $1,000, but nonetheless. Anyway.
I mean, to some extent, it's around packaging. I mean, the originally envisioned way that it was packaged in the 2003 strategic plan, which is the first time the Institute came out with this idea of $1,000 genome, it was under a category called quantum leaps. So that was just another phrase. I mean, so I think what's meant by this is a quantum leap advance in synthetic DNA. I guess somebody could put their people could put their heads together and say, what is a realistic, outrageous, audacious, but not completely unrealistic figure to come out? What would it take to synthesize a human genome? What does that mean? And do you want to put a dollar figure on it? I mean, we put a dollar figure on $1,000 genome in part because it seemed like that was a good cost of a clinical test. I don't know if there's quite the same parallel in the case of synthetic genomics, but you could consider it. But I think it's quantum leap in nature.
It actually. Oh, sorry. You want to go first? You want me to? So it might be more. I mean, here the quality is going to make a lot of difference, and because I will point out, combinatorially, you could probably have done this for quite some time. The question is, do you have the quality to actually use it? And so there's a lot of factors there. But I just want to say, I mean, this is good. You've taken a couple areas, nucleic acid sequencing, synthetic nucleic acids, that are a high priority for the community, and starting to think about how to re-energize these. And I think in that context, the coordinating center is also very important. One of the things that will happen, and hopefully by advertising this, you will get more participation from chemists, from physicists, from engineers, from material scientists. And thinking about how to integrate these within some of the common goals, I think for the coordinating center is a very important concept. Yeah, so I think this is a well thought out proposal. I think in terms of goals, and absolutely, these are goal oriented programs. And so you need a coordinating center to try to measure whether or not you've actually met those goals.
Yeah, one
I
of the
think it's
things,
money
one
well
of the things
spent.
we have is
Yeah.
a much more diverse community as we're allowing so many different activities. And one thing we've heard from the grantees is, I'm a physicist, I need some help with the biology, or I'm a biologist, I need some help with the engineering. And that's a place we hope the coordinating center can also help, especially in those yearly grantee meetings when we get people together.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, I think this is all great. I'm most excited about the synthetic nucleic acids, not because I want to apply for them, but I want to buy them and use them. But I think thinking about sort of the impact, I think I might have been the one that talked to you about the impact along the lines of the $1,000 genome. It's more like you need at least a 1 to 2 order of magnitude increase in the length of the oligos and the decrease in the price of the oligos and scale of the pool of the oligos. Because if you can go, now you can easily get 100,000, 200 MERS. But with that, you can hardly use that to construct ORFs. If you could go to 2 kb, you can suddenly synthesize most ORFs and variants of them. So, and if you can go to 20 kb, I mean, every order of magnitude there is really quite game changing. And I think that's the kind of thing that would be great to push in that RFA.
Well, we talk about in the concept clearance about the need for at least a tenfold better. And one of the challenges is that we usually give a couple different ways to be better. And so.
So I would agree about the importance of the coordinating center, but I anticipate that the concept of a coordinating center to a collection of small businesses and academic entities might initially seem somewhat clunky or foreign. I would encourage them to integrate the coordinating center into their original application. How will they use it? How will they cooperate with it? So I think that will foster the concept that this is something for.
That's a good reminder on the order with which we get these out. We've already have some language like that to make the grantee meeting very strong expectation. And realistically, I hear you loud and clear, but I also think that we've done very good by providing carrots. People want to be at that meeting because they're getting a lot out of it. And I think what I'd like to see us do with the coordinating center as much as we can is have it be more of a carrot situation.
Well, I actually had almost the exact same comment as Hal, and I have to be honest, your answer didn't really wow me. So
Okay.
this is a lot of money. It's not
Yes.
it's not for a meeting, and I would agree. I think you've got to have language in the RFAs at least. You're not going to really be able to have language in the program announcements, it sounds like, about exactly how you're expected to work with the coordinating center. Because otherwise you're going to have people who got their grants, they know what they want to do, they're going to get going, and you're going to have this coordinating center here with a mission. You've got to have like both pieces of the puzzle fit together. So I would think a bit more about
I
that.
totally agree with you, and I'm hearing you loud and clear. And we'll make sure, we already have language to make sure the grantee meeting happens and it goes, and people participate.
Yeah.
And so we are going to need to do much more than that in the new funding announcements.
Well, because it
understand that.
sounds like the coordinating center should really be coordinating how many other people access these technologies, which means these grantees are going to have to get their stuff into the right format for the coordinating center to do that. And they kind of need to understand that's part of getting the money. I did also just want you to clarify, so the RFA is going to have 3 dates a year?
2.
2.
So it gets
Okay.
a little confusing. Go ahead.
But so my question is, just as a non-technology development person, someone walking up to NHGRI with a great new idea, how are they going to decide whether to go for the program announcement or the RFAs? How do they make that decision?
And I would add to that, or one of the parent announcements, right?
Or the, yeah.
So the answer to that, at least from a very bureaucratic point of view, is if you read the the PAR for genomic technology development, and then you read the other two RFAs for synthetic or sequencing, it's quote unquote obvious which of the three you fall into. Of course, it's not always obvious. We understand that. That's the reason we ask them to send in letters of intent. It's the reason we follow up with them and ask for draft-specific aims. The genome tech is due right now. I've had people come in and they are just sure this falls into genome tech. And I'm like, well, let's look at the sequencing technology development RFA. What you're proposing looks a lot like that to me, right? And usually people listen because they want to be successful.
Mike, can you say a little bit more about the seed money? What percentage of the coordinating center dollars would be distributed?
So I don't think we have a solid number for that right now. I think that's one of our challenges is listening a little bit more here as to what's needed. But I'm hoping that we're somewhere in the order of 2/3 to 3/4 going to the seed money. But as I see more and more activities at the coordinating center, then I worry that there's less headroom left for the opportunity funds.
Can you say a bit about the process for allocating that seed money? Would those decisions be made with NHGRI staff, or who's deciding where it goes?
So the plan is to try to use what we hear has worked in other cases. So HubMap has this kind of activity. The UDN uses opportunity funds also, the 4D nucleome. I'm not super familiar with how they did those, but we have people internally who've worked with these opportunity funds and very much intend to use that knowledge of the Institute to make sure that we get the money out well. There is a review involved. I think we're making the sub-awards, so we certainly hold some cards in that happening.
Review, but not NIH peer review.
Not NIH peer review. Yes.
Because then everything grinds to a halt.
Careful with those words.
Other questions for Mike? Okay, so I heard a largely positive discussion here. We are talking about 3 separate RFAs. Are you comfortable taking a batch vote? Would anyone want to vote different? If you want to vote differently, I'm happy to call 3 votes. Trey?
So just to make a point, I think I agreed, a lot of support for this. It's of course always a little uncomfortable to vote yay on something when money is probably being taken away from something else, and we have no idea what that is. Just a point.
I'm going to let a division director answer that if they
Not on.
Subconscious. So just to be clear, you're saying what if we're increasing this? If we go back in Mike's slide, we've increased a chunk of this money. Where is that? What are we not funding to make room for
Right,
this?
and I'm not sure that I was looking for an explicit answer other than just to say that it's that before I give my enthusiastic support for this idea, it's just not clear what we're deprioritizing here.
Right. So
right.
Yeah. And so what I'd say is part of the reason we haven't been as clear in this deprioritizing, and Eric hopefully will back me up on this, is we have to do things in a weird order relative to our strategic planning, right? Because if we waited for our strategic planning to be completed before we started moving forward with activities, we would then not be able to start anything until 2 years after we got done with our strategic planning. So our decisions in terms of what we're prioritizing and not prioritizing is coming from our interpretation of feedback that we're getting from strategic planning. So first of all, we are recognizing some of that. Within this area, council knows this. I don't know how much of the general public knows this. We sort of have our funding sort of in different areas. We have the basic, I'm getting it mixed up. We're having, what is Stream A called officially? it's not basic genomics to genomic technology because that's the focus group.
Biology of genomes, isn't it?
No, that.
Genome, no.
Biology and structure of genomes. Sorry, we have biology of structures of genomes, and then we have genomics of disease. And in those two areas, we're currently projecting we're going to kind of keep a constant amount of funding in that. So as we increase this, we're going to be decreasing from activities that we would be funding under those areas. And so, you can think about what are major things that we currently fund in those areas. And then think about, so this is one of them. We have investigator initiated, we have the SEGs, we have ENCODE, we have the genome sequencing program, a lot of the U24s, et cetera. That's the sort of universe of things that we would, so as we're increasing this, we would be decreasing some of those activities that I just discussed in various ways. Is that helping you? I don't know, Eric, would you add anything more to that?
Well, I think I would just emphasize that, number one, there's a lot of churn in parts of our portfolio, and so that's freeing up money for allocation to other things. Not all of that's perfectly defined. Number two, there are good signals from Congress of budgetary increases, so that by having an RFA like this ready to go, if we get the kind of increases that we think we might get next year, we would be poised and sort of ready to capitalize on that money quickly. And part of this process is also to get input from council about levels of enthusiasm for these different things, and then we will go back and figure out, whether at the end of the day the numbers are precisely what Mike is saying, and when, exactly when we implement it might have to be determined by how things shake out budgetarily and so forth. So it's freedom to operate to some extent, but I think you could pretty much anticipate that it's part of the churn and it's part of the anticipated increase.
And maybe this isn't, it's clearly not for today, but maybe in the future.
I don't know if
Yeah,
your
it's
microphone
on.
is on. Okay, it's just not turning
It's on.
red.
Oh, yeah, the courtesy light isn't working. It's probably not for today, but another good exercise to go through would be to start think about, what is the proportion of monies that we're spending on things like technology development, which really are foundational for the future. And so I think this is well within the realm of the lower levels still, as I understand it, but that would be a good thing to visit.
Yeah, and another, do you want to respond exactly to that?
No, just to second that, I think at a future council meeting, it'd be great to roll out the big picture of this program and where this fits in. Totally agree.
And the one last thing that I would also sort of comment on this, particularly with the PAR that you looked at today, if you saw Mike's last graph, he didn't show growth in that PAR, but we are thinking about generally growing the portion of our portfolio that goes to investigator-initiated awards. That's got that chicken and an egg thing that we talk about with council a lot, right? We want to have more investigator-initiated awards come in. In order for that to happen, we need people to think of Genome as a place to submit their investigator-initiated awards. So those of you watching this on TV, we do accept investigator-initiated awards. Contact the appropriate program or division director, and we're happy to talk to you about that. But if you look at these, particularly the PAR, but even these these RFAs for our RO1s are, even though those wouldn't technically be investigator initiated, we see this as a way to sort of increase RO1 type investigators coming into NHGRI. And so one of the things some of this is also going to be competing with is our general investigator initiated pool. Although as we're growing that, it's probably not competing yet. It's just augmenting how we're trying to grow that, particularly with the PAR.
I would just add to that there's no question as we publish these kinds of announcements, we get a lot more inquiries. People notice.
And I assume when you say, $4 million a year for the sequencing component, if you only get 2 million of meritorious applications, you're going to roll that 2 million into something else.
I'd just answer that. We've, in the past, sometimes we do a little more than we've said because we have really good applications, and other times we don't get enough good applications and we don't fund the ones that shouldn't be funded,
Yeah, those numbers are always contingent on meritorious applications and available budget.
Carolyn, I would just say, though, that by issuing RFAs,
No, we're not.
you're this idea of getting more investigator-initiated grants in continues, and that's why I asked the specific question about how does somebody decide which of these
Right.
to apply to. And they sometimes have different budget lines, and they sometimes make it a lot easier to ask for more money from an RFA than from PAR. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things from the investigator's point of view that's going into this decision. And I don't think that, I think these RFAs are very important. I
Right.
don't think they're necessarily going to increase the investigator initiative. Maybe they do because of what you said, which is people call and go, well, I'm not going to go for this, so I will.
Right.
But I
I
think
think-
you may need specific messaging around investigator-initiated grants apart from these RFAs.
Yes, and we actually, we recognize that, and that's coming to a council discussions near you is something we want to talk with you guys about, specifically also as we think about moving to increase that. How do we do that? What are the best ways to sort of do that with a little bit of this chicken and the egg issues that come up around that? But I think I would bring it, and I think the PAR I think of as much more as being in line with encouraging than the RFAs. I do think that's an important distinction, but also to the competing, that is also part of what we may be competing some of this against as well.
Okay, now are you comfortable doing a batch vote, or should we break them out one at a time? So your preference. Batch it is. Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the concept, which includes 3 separate RFAs? Second, I see all in favor. Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Thank you, Gail. Do you want the podium or just want to abstain?
Yeah, I have too many questions that I think this group probably already understands way better than I will in this lifetime about why isn't industry doing this? What really is the demand for these grants versus are you trying to pull people into the thing? So I find it really hard to evaluate. I respect, Ed, that everybody thinks this is a good idea, but
I think industry is doing this, they're just not having annual meetings that inform the rest of us.
And this tends to do things that are much earlier in the process where industry is not necessarily willing to take the risk.
Thank you, Mike. Lisa, Chadwick, want to come up? They did. We had one abstention. All else were in favor.